Testing 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
واحد اثنين ثلاثة أربعة خمسة.
What the
Hello and welcome to the 538 Politics Podcast. My name is Jody Avirgan. It's only been a week since we got together and discussed the 14 paths of Trump's presidency, but there have been a couple of developments in the last week, maybe worth considering and maybe ones that would have caused us to rethink some of those paths. So first off, Trump's approval dropped to its lowest point since February, bringing the generic ballot down with it, perhaps. And second, an anonymous op-ed in the Times and Bob Woodward's new book, Fear, helped shed some light into how those around President Trump are behaving. So here to discuss what we learned and the value of inner circle type reporting, our usual crew, my inner circle, your inner circle. Anonymous 538 editor-in-chief, say hello.
Hello.
Anonymous senior politics writer, say hello.
Hi, Jody. It's Claire Malone.
You unmasked yourself. And anonymous managing editor, Micah Cohen.
Can we unmask this joke?
It's been more than a week, hasn't it?
Since we got together and talked, Labor Day was 1 week.
Oh,
we pre-recorded.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It has been, 10 days?
Can I tell you, when I listened to that episode, we had that joke where we were pretending we were recording on Labor Day. Mm-hmm. And I said, I went to my French beach house, right? Which I then did. The Miller family were wonderful. Thank you. And then I had this moment where I was like really confused about like where I was in time because it tricked me for a second.
When you were listening to it?
When I was listening, yeah. I was like,
I'm really glad you're running the site.
I was like, what the fuck is happening? And then I remembered.
I'm also in time warp mode, guys.
Yeah.
Nate's on 2 hours of sleep, so
3 hours.
discount everything he says by 30%.
I had a LaCroix.
By 30% more than your usual 20%?
Exactly.
I thought you were going to say, like, I had liqueur.
Nate's drunk and sleep deprived.
Okay, let's get into it. And before we talk about generic ballot and inner circle reporting, let's actually ask a question that we like to ask from time to time. And it's been a while. Good use of polling or bad use of polling? Our example this week comes from our pals at the Upshot at the New York Times, who are trying something new and kind of cool. They announced that along with Siena College, they are going to conduct dozens of polls of competitive House districts and Senate races over the next 2 months. And what makes their project different is that they've built a platform where you can kind of watch this polling happening live in real time as each person is contacted and their result is tallied. So let's discuss what we think about it. But I think maybe, Micah, can you help me kind of describe what this looks like for people who aren't familiar and haven't seen it? I actually have it up on a screen in front of us. So at this very moment that we're recording, they are polling West Virginia's 3rd congressional district.
Yeah, so you can kind of see, they set it up so you can see the current top line. So right now they have Carol Miller defeating Ojeda.
And they've conducted 20,421 calls. 381 people have responded.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. You know, they give you past results. They give you a map which shows you where in the district people have responded so far and which candidate they picked. And then they just have like a ton of information about the poll, about the district, about how they're weighting the results. It's like a huge undertaking, really impressive and interesting journalistically, interesting politically, all sorts of things.
Yeah, I know Nate is going to have thoughts about this, and I think it's like a really interesting decision by the Times to take this on. And I'm sure there were lots of internal discussions about, did we mislead people with the needle? You know, do we want to do that again?
Well, in their 2016 forecast.
Yeah, their 2016 forecast. That's what I'm referring to. Yeah, this the general kind of, I would say, probably misadventure a little bit for them, unfortunately.
And the needle was this sort of real-time thing that showed votes as they came in, right?
Yeah. And so it's interesting to me that they're doing this and they're trying to it's like explaining polling to people, which I think is interesting, you know, getting really into particulate detail for people, things like that. And I think it's all really admirable. And I think Nate will have thoughts. The one thing I'm interested to see is if people, like how people interpret this page, like if they see the top line results and they're like, oh my God, like this person is up TK points, whatever it may be, this person's down, like that's the state of the race. Or if like the point of the Times Project, which is to be like, we don't have all the results yet, and this is a poll that's these are things that are in process, if that will get through to people. Because I think the intention is really good, which is to explain step by step to people how this works. Part of me does worry, and I will here be the person in the room that Nate can direct his anger to, that like people might have the same kind of misunderstandings that they did in 2016.
Stop catering to idiots. I turned 40. And the thing I realized when I was 40, you have to bleep that out. Stop living your life to cater to idiots.
You don't think that there's a class of people who aren't straight up idiots who still might
Wait, I'm sorry.
misinterpret
Is
this in a way
journalism
that-
only for smart people? Is being informed only for smart people? Is that like
That's the definition of being an idiot.
No, wait, hold on. Actually, hold on for a second. Like, we live in a democracy. A liberal democracy is in order to have a functioning liberal democracy, you need to have people understand things and understand the news. So we're only catering to smart people?
Idiots vote.
Yeah, idiots vote.
It's not my concern who votes, right? My job is to deliver information to people who I can add value to their lives. And where the sweet spot is for us, we have an audience of millions and millions, tens of millions of people. You know, even the New York Times has a fairly niche audience. Even ABC News has a fairly niche audience of a few million people. You know, I mean, there are two types of idiots. There's like idiots, and there's like idiots who are acting in bad faith. And the latter group in particular, I don't really care about. But I think people are too eager in news to cater to like the worst fragment of their audience, people who are trollish, people who just aren't going to get it even if you do explain things well, right? I mean, look, there is a burden of explanation, and that's part of what good editing and good journalistic judgment is about. But if you, like, put something up in big, shiny letters and say, hey, look, don't take this seriously until you get X number of respondents, and you take it seriously, then I don't care about you, right? It's not my fault at that point.
So why show it when people shouldn't be taking it seriously?
Because it shows how the sausage is made, number one. Number two, there is no bright line threshold where, you know, frankly, a 500-person poll is not a giant sample either. And it shows, like, the transparency of what happens when you have samples and how much they affect things, potentially. And there are some more technical objections, like, okay, if you're waiting in real time, that's difficult because you usually miss some people and you call them back, right? And so therefore that could introduce additional bias above and beyond what the sample size is. But the fact is there are already lots and lots of additional biases already included in polls. So, I think Nate Cohn used the term, we're demystifying polling and showing you kind of what it really looks like. And
I think we agree on that side of things. I'm just saying, like, I hope that the point of their project isn't missed by people.
Yeah,
and I also think that not everyone is like, I think we should educate people and not just write them off.
I agree with that. And the part of Nate's comment that I do agree with is people who are acting in bad faith. Don't cater to them. And I actually am worried. I think this is an awesome project by the Upshot, but I do think the root of it is a little bit what Nate is talking about, which is worrying about the people who came out of 2016 saying the polls are the root of all evil. They got this wrong. Who came out of 2016 and said, oh, the Upshot, Hillary Clinton lost because you gave her only a, whatever it was, 11% chance of winning. 15% chance of winning. So I worry a little bit that the root of this is the Times saying, okay, we got burned in 2016, even though they didn't actually get burned. Sure, they could have done some things differently, but the people who think the Times really screwed up in 2016,
you can smell some office politics on it.
Are willfully ignorant.
They did, but not the Upshot.
But not the Upshot
was the only part of the newsroom that got the election close to right. I mean, 2016 was I'm not going to pile on, but a very, very problematic for the Times, and the Upshot was the least problem.
But so on its own merits, I really like this.
For sure.
But the cause of it is a little bit like, I think, sort of catering to willful idiots.
But you kind of have to... Yeah, I think in the CJR write-up about this Columbia Journalism Review write-up about this, someone said, like, readers haven't yet caught up to the sophistication of the polls. In other words, you need to walk people through the baby steps in order to get them to the understanding. And I think that's an admirable project. And I agree with everyone here that, like, frankly, a lot of journalists and political types now are being like, you can't rely on data, you can't do anything. And, like, sure, like, not entirely, but also, you know, there's great value to data. So it's sort of an interesting crossroads. But I think it's a really interesting project for the Times. I just think it's...
I think we all agree on that.
Yeah.
I mean, look...
Nate wants to fight one more time.
I'm sure if I had been at the Times and we had our 30% or 50, instead of 15% or whatever else, right, and they were throwing me under the bus, then that would have been nuclear, I'm sure. But look...
you would have went nuclear.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Columbia
Knowing
Journalism
you
Review
as I do, Nate,
would have a lot of good things to write about.
Nothing like going nuclear in CJR.
But 1 in 6 chance of something happening isn't that unlikely either. And they were actually one of the more cautious forecasts among those out there, and it was a basically well-designed model. But they are leaning really heavily into this project to the point where they are like taking on risk, right? If they, so far these polls are consistent with the story in which Democrats are favored to win the House, right? When they filter into our model, they tend to hold it steady, or it might actually help Democrats a little bit on average, right? So they're clearly going to be invested in a position, right? And in some ways, it's like we can always say, well, our job is to aggregate other people's data, and we assess how accurate it is, and therefore that's what the probabilities are, right? For them, it's actually like, if anything, you're taking on, in certain ways, more responsibility, in certain ways, different or less. I don't know how you want to put it, right? But they're leaning heavily into it enough where it's like, where you can't call this like a half-assed measure. It's a very full-assed. Not even asked at all, right? It's a really
it's an apple-bottom jeans assed effort.
Apart from that, though, they're also going to poll roughly 100 competitive districts,
and that's
which itself is really valuable too. And so,
good for us.
Good for us, but likewise, in a weird way, we're also good for them in the sense that we have been doing these models for a long time, right? Half of the adventure is the polling, half of it is plugging into this models and seeing what effect it has vis-a-vis other indicators. So now you can kind of have both. You have to go to different sites to get them, but it's clearly the Upshot, Nate Cohn in particular, Amanda Cox, whomever else, have said we want to actually focus on the mechanics of polling as opposed to forecasting, right? That's where we add value. And I'll be honest, they know a lot more about polling than I do. By the same token, I think I'm better at
forecasting.
Maybe not forecasting, but we've been doing these models for a long time. We know a few tricks of the trade, right? And so to have non-redundant approaches is really pretty interesting, I think.
So we have to move on, and I want to get a final good use or bad use judgment here. But you did mention, it's worth saying, that this is a lot of good, high-quality polling that we wouldn't have had before. And Nate, are there any particular gaps or races that this is targeting that's really helping us out?
I mean, this Ojeda race in West Virginia 3 is one where we had only one poll where it showed the Democrat winning in a district that Trump won by 50 points. And so getting a second poll there is really important because there's a giant gap between what you'd expect based on the polls and on other indicators in that district. And it kind of so far has come out, it's subject to change, but he's losing by 6, which is actually kind of close to where our model had it. So sometimes it's pretty smart about incorporating polling and non-polling info.
And 24 people have answered that poll since we started this discussion. And if Miller is up by 6 at this moment in time.
If I were going to be really, really, really nitpicky, then I would say
let's not be nitpicky.
Let me be. I think they would even appreciate this nitpick.
Okay.
But, maybe targeting a few districts that are not seen as competitive to get a sense for how you're kind of calibrating the numbers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This question of how Democrats' popular vote will translate into seats actually depends a lot on how much they run up the score in Republican or in Democratic held incumbent districts, right? Do they win Carolyn Maloney's district, my home district in New York, by 70 points or 55 points, right? I'm not saying they should target that district, but maybe a few that are on the fringes as competitive just to kind of test the waters a little bit. But apart from that, I give the project a A+. I kind of see some of the same complaints from pollsters and so forth that remind me of when we first put out our pollster ratings and people are invested in this and they're competitive in this and they're this is different than what we're used to doing, right? Which it certainly is, but different is not the same thing as bad. I think there are thoughtful rationales behind it. And again, the rationale is we believe in the long run. This is every news organization should believe in transparency. This will dovetail in interesting ways with the anonymity discussion later on, right? But to me,
this is super transparent.
To me, transparency is one of the core values of journalism. So I kind of blend my don't care to the idiot stance with there should be a strong default toward transparency. If you're so transparent or it's so obscure that even non-idiots don't get it, then, okay, maybe you have to re-examine something potentially.
I think you got to amend that to be bad faith idiots. Also, it's well designed. I walked into Nate's office on Friday, and he was just staring at the dots. So the Upshot clearly did a good job of...
For each column. Yeah. Well, that's also part of the risk, I think, as Claire was identifying with the needle, just kind of you can sit there and watch it fly back and forth and ride that roller coaster.
Let me bring up one more good thing.
Okay.
Which is that if you publish results in real time, you can't herd. Herding is a technique where you put a finger on the scale for your result to make it look more like what other people have.
Can't you just herd in real time?
Yeah, they've got Really good herders.
It's automated. I mean, Les Nate Cohn is sitting there
making a herder bot,
a knob or something.
And so we'll say, good job. We like this. Good use of polling. Thank you for doing
Unambiguous
this.
good use of polling.
Okay. Let's move on. And next, we're going to talk about that anonymous op-ed and Bob Woodward's new book. But first, let me tell you that today's podcast is brought to you by WeWork. Whether you are a team of 2 or 200 at WeWork, space matters. From single desk solutions and innovative amenities to flexible private offices designed to grow along with your headcount, WeWork gives your business the space you need to connect, focus, build, and succeed. WeWork now has over 280 locations across more than 70 cities in 24 countries around the world, making it the perfect partner for your next satellite office, regional headquarters, or remote employees. When you think about space, are you taking into account all of the full costs and amenities? WeWork pricing does. It incorporates everything you need to keep your business running, including HVAC, Wi-Fi, AV, printing, package handling, cleaning, and security. This isn't exactly the same thing, but we've recently had to do a little bit of a desk reshuffle here at our offices. We hired some folks. We're trying to get people to sit closer to each other and so forth. And the logistical ripple effect from that is just amazing and kind of all-consuming. And we're figuring it out, but you can imagine that I'm very interested in elegant solutions to this kind of problem. And that's exactly what WeWork provides, including consistent offering across cities, transparent, clear pricing. You'll know exactly what your costs will be up front. You have access to all the locations you need through one simple, flexible contract. It's time to visit WeWork. Go to WeWork.com to find a location near you today. Today's podcast is also brought to you by Sunbasket. Sunbasket has been rated the #1 meal kit by leading publications, and it's no wonder why. They offer 18 weekly recipes with options for paleo, gluten-free, Mediterranean, lean and clean, vegan, and more. I rattle off all those diets each time, and maybe you're into one of them, but they all basically come down to the same thing, which is we all want to eat healthier. And that's really what Sunbasket helps you do. Eat healthier, simple as that. Sunbasket makes it easy and convenient to cook healthy, delicious meals at home, no matter how much experience you have in the kitchen. Now you get more options than ever. Just go to the Sunbasket app and pick from 18 weekly recipes, easily cooked dishes like seared albacore tuna steaks with green beans and soft-cooked eggs. Sunbasket works with the best farms and suppliers to bring you fresh, organic produce and responsibly raised meats and seafood. Everything is pre-measured, easy to prep. You can get a healthy and delicious meal on the table or the couch or the bed, wherever you want to eat, in about 30 minutes. Go to sunbasket.com/politics today to learn more and get $35 off your first order. That's sunbasket.com/politics. We're back, and as I've mentioned, there was this anonymous op-ed, as I'm sure all of you know, from a Trump official in the Times last week. And in addition, Bob Woodward's new book, Fear, came out, which details some of the chaos in the Trump administration. And considering that we just had a conversation about the paths of the Trump presidency, we thought it was worth asking if there's anything in this last week of information that maybe would update our thinking of the fate of the Trump presidency overall. There is also lots of speculation on the betting markets and beyond about who wrote this op-ed. But let's start first with the content of it. So, Claire, what did you learn from the op-ed and the Woodward book, and maybe from the combination of those two coming out at the same time?
I'm not sure I learned anything new from either of those things. I think that the Woodward book, which we should take first because that's a more substantial thing. You know, Bob Woodward seems to have had a lot of access to people. I mean, a lot of people spoke on deep background to him. But we kind of learned probably more substantially reported things that we heard in the Michael Wolff book and that we've heard from news reports trickling out, which are, you know, the president, the people who work for him do not seem to have a generally high estimation of his intelligence or his impulse control. The president is a difficult boss, and people around him are worried about his behavior. I don't think that that was news to me on any front. And so, you know, I think books like this are interesting because I wonder how much it trickles out beyond people who live in D.C. or New York and are into this kind of stuff. The kind of people who listen to our podcast or read our site might notice it. But I do wonder, and it might trickle down in the midterm season, but I do wonder how much this sort of, like, it's not gossipy because that's too flip a word for the situation. But I'm not sure, A, if I learned too much new, it's just sort of, you know, solidifying things that we already know. But B, I think the more crucial thing is, like, how much do these things about the work climate and constitutional climate of the White House, how much is that trickling down, and will it affect voters' actions. I'm interested either way.
Can I just ask you, though, about the op-ed certainly went to this, but I think a lot of the parts of Woodward's book that are getting attention went to this, too. Not just people around Trump think he's an idiot and are scared, but also some of this picture of them actively working against them, undermining him, however you want to characterize it. That felt a little new, maybe?
I think that stuff, where people are taking letters off his desk and trying to sort of subvert his orders. I mean, that stuff is, certainly troubling in the sense of people possibly, depending on what they're doing, people possibly making decisions that, like, even if they think it's the right and moral thing to do, and even if you might agree with them, it does throw onto the table this more philosophical question about our American democracy, which is it cool for people who are unelected to kind of manipulate the president's decisions?
It's not cool. It's undemocratic.
It's very Edith Wilson, Woodrow Wilson's wife, who was basically like the default president in the last few months of his presidency, which has been, historically pointed to as like, well, that wasn't cool, but it happened.
It happened, and that's the thing. I want to be a little careful here. Like, I think it is totally normal for there to be informal checks within an administration on the president. I mean, if you read any history,
and any good leadership team has someone who pushes back a little bit. This is different. I think we should be clear that we're not saying people who are being like not the yes man. They're saying, listen, Mr. President, I'm not sure that's good. This is people who are like.
Well, I'd even go beyond that, though. So okay, there's the straight up, Mr. President, that's not a good idea. Yeah. Then there's like your boss tells you to do something and you slow play doing it. Nate asks for stuff all the time that I'll sort of like.
Yeah, you think I would notice that?
Well, exactly, but
we ask for Senate models.
What was the? Oh,
don't get him started. Don't get him.
Just a joke.
What was it? Eisenhower. I think it was Eisenhower or Truman or someone, right? Someone in that 1950-ish mid-century era.
One of those bald men.
One of those, white guys that was president back in the 1950s.
And the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s.
But they were like, you have to ask for something 3 times to get it done. Even if you're the president of the United States, if there is internal resistance to something, you have to ask for it 3 times. Once can be ignored cheerfully, right? The second time can be, you need more of an excuse. And the third time you have to do it.
But that's like a normal.
This is different.
It's a normal system, and like actually, that's like one way. If the president asks for it 18 times, clearly the president feels strongly about it. This, what Claire was saying, is a step beyond that, where, if that anecdote about Gary Cohn taking the letter off Trump's desk is true,
Gary Cohn, Shaker Heights boy.
These Ohio people are nuts. That is deeply troubling.
In which direction? Sorry, troubling in that he feels the need to do that, or troubling in that he's doing that?
Both.
Yeah. I mean, it's troubling that he feels the need to do that, but I think it's more troubling that he did that, if he did it. Same with this op-ed writer. The op-ed writer saying essentially there's a cabal in the White House trying to, undermine the president is like, it's deeply troubling. It's like the op-ed made me think of what Nate said, I think a couple of podcasts ago, about the craziness of the Trump administration having a snow globe feel to it, which I think what you meant, Nate, was like, it doesn't feel like we're in the midst of a crisis when you like walk down the street. Yeah. Again, that's a reflection of certain our privileges, bubble. Right? But then I thought when this op-ed came out, like, what is it supposed to feel like? You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it will ever feel crazy.
It is ex post facto disenfranchisement of voters who, agree with it or not, elected Donald Trump to be president. He won the election.
Right.
And these people are subverting the will of the people, basically.
And David Frum wrote a really persuasive piece on this, which was like, if you feel this way, then freaking resign.
Yeah.
Go public.
I think that's what I found most interesting about the op-ed was how the 25th Amendment was dispatched so quickly and so blithely, as in, we considered it for a little while, but then just decided to deal with it on our own. I mean, that's where it's like, we as an American system of laws and constitution and norms have thought about what happens in the case of the president being just not fit for the job.
Right.
And they have decided to go around those rules.
They're like, screw that.
And I think that to me, that was the mindset that writes an anonymous op-ed, does these things subversively, and also says, despite all these problems, all these things, I don't know, not the 25th Amendment, not yet. I mean, if not, like, when, right? Like, if you guys are all feeling like this in the White House, when does it rise to the occasion of having serious discussions?
You can't have it both ways. You can't say Trump is so unfit that it is the right thing to do for us to undermine him from within the
logic
administration.
was not sound. I mean,
no, it's not. Right.
And it's I'm sure it's an emotional decision as well, but it's, and there are social pressures and political pressures that these people face, but the logic is not there.
But even if we take on good faith that this person is trying to, protect America from this presidency, Frum's larger point was also that writing this op-ed causes a ton of instability. The act of writing this op-ed anonymously in this way causes a ton of instability. And so it kind of cuts against the argument that I'm here to try and temper this presidency.
Yeah, and on multiple fronts. I mean, the act of writing it is sure to inflame Trump and make him more paranoid. But even the content of the op-ed itself almost seemed designed to, like, frankly, appeal to a New York Times op-ed reader and not the country at large. I mean, to Claire's point, the writer sort of blithely raises and then dismisses the 25th Amendment. The writer uses the word resistance. They say, I'm not part of that resistance. But even using that word, every headline you saw about the op-ed was like resistance in quotes, right? It's like, what was it? There were other parts that were just sort of like, there were petty attacks on Trump in that op-ed. It was just like, I don't know, seemed like poorly executed, even if you put yourself in the shoes of the writer.
This person who wrote the op-ed is one of three things, none of which are good. It has to be one of these three things or maybe more than one of them, right?
Yeah.
They're either a idiot.
In which case,
aforementioned idiots from the previous segment.
They love that Upshot model.
There's an idiot who probably reads after 13 responses on the Upshot poll and starts tweeting about it. That kind of idiot. But also so much of an idiot that they think that, like, actually this will help my cause when outing this is not honorable in the way that he thinks it's like telling everyone, oh, hey, you know who had that giant anonymous donation to charity? It was me. It was moi, right? So it undermines his own cause, and I'm assuming it's a he because most people in the Trump administration are he. And in my view, this was written in a male voice. Maybe it's wrong. I'm going to use the word he.
Okay, go ahead. That's one.
So either he's an idiot or he is a self-aggrandizing hack who is going to use this to get a very, very big book contract from someone and appear on MSNBC and Fox News and CNN, right? And who's probably fairly low level and who uses this as a way to gain notoriety, and or someone who is trying to protect their reputation in good society if they're already rich, which a lot of people in the Trump administration already are. Or three, they're a troll who is trying to undermine actual attempts to undermine Trump and or undermine the New York Times and journalism.
That's interesting.
So it has to be one of those three things. There is no other possibility.
There's no I think we all tend to be on the same side of this, but just to articulate, you do not entertain the notion that this is a person who's genuinely shocked by what they see. They've made a hard choice to stay on the inside and do these things.
Because the worst thing you could possibly do is publish an editorial in the New York Times about it.
But it's gotten a lot of attention. It's probably advanced a little bit of sounding the alarm about where this administration is. I'm just trying to sort of articulate potentially some of the...
But that goes back to my original statement about the book, and this is like, does it sound the alarm? To whom is the alarm being sounded? The people in this room, as a proxy for Washington and New York and the people who listen to this podcast, are already onto this. So who is the alarm sounding?
You don't think this thing broke through? It felt like it broke through.
It felt to us like
it felt to us.
I mean,
I'm saying we don't know, and I'm saying like this is not necessarily the tact that you would take if you I think if you are let's give the person the benefit of the doubt and assume that they're a cabinet member. A cabinet member resigning with an op-ed in the New York Times to which their name is attached saying all of this stuff
would
create a stir.
Yeah.
This person did not do that.
Yeah.
Well, and this is the front where I think the Woodward book is more interesting. I mean, I have some quibbles with Woodward, but That's ridiculous to even say. Who the freak?
Hey, Woodward. Micah Cohen would like a word.
Yeah, Bob Woodward, legendary journalist.
No, I think we should be able to question authority. We don't laugh at that. Like,
No,
we should
I
be
know.
able- No, I'm serious.
No,
like,
I agree. I said it.
Yeah.
No, I think Woodward has a bias towards
Wait, you are
authority.
accusing Bob Woodward of having bias?
Hear me out. I think Woodward has a bias towards authority and towards the establishment, right? But within that context, he is a great reporter with an unquestionable record of accuracy, right? And so I agree that there wasn't a ton that was new in the book, but I think the book does represent the kind of like best version of a certain type of
Gossipy book that's important gossip about.
Important gossip and like an important view into the administration. Look, if you're reading, there is a genre of Washington journalism these days, every day in the Washington Post and the New York Times, that tries to give the reader a view into what it's like in the White House. And this is the best, most comprehensive version of that we have so far. And so in that sense, it's just a useful milestone, if only symbolic, of like, oh, I feel more comfortable saying now the Trump White House is in disarray and maybe is sort of broken beyond repair.
Yeah, and I think things like the Lester Holt interview with the president, like it's important in this presidency to have documentation and to have things for posterity. The Woodward book, I think, is kind of replacing the problematic Michael Wolff book as the most comprehensive written document saying like people inside are appalled.
Yes.
Are we going to do this whole segment and get through it and not speculate on who we think it is? Can we do that? Or are people itching to throw out?
I don't think it's – I mean, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't have any insight into it.
No, I'm very proud of us.
I think
Nate wants this.
I found the whole Twitter thing when it immediately came out. I mean, I was trying to stay off Twitter at the end of last week, but I was just like everyone's kind of like that stupid thing where people were like, Pence sometimes says Lodestar. And it's like, this is –
We engaged in that a little bit, though. I mean, it's like –
but internally, I mean, there is a difference, right? We kind of like did a
internally,
little bit of the parlor game in Slack or whatever, and even
really
that
slowed
was like
down
a
an
little,
edit of mine.
Yeah. That's why
I was pissed.
Yeah. All right, Nate, are you itching to kind of take a guess or offer a?
I think it's someone
textual
lame.
analysis.
Someone.
See, I don't think the
Like
Times
who?
would have published it if it was someone really
First of
lame.
all, this is the Times op-ed page.
Yes, they totally would have.
Do you think it's someone
It's as
who's
clickbaity as it gets anywhere in journalism.
No, look.
It is.
I think
Go
they
look
would-
at what the op-ed page has written.
I think
I
they-
have the
as-
highest respect for the – well, not the highest respect. I have lots of respect for the New York Times newsroom. I think if they were actually good journalists, should have turned this over to the newsroom and said, we don't want this op-ed to be used for self-aggrandizement. It's a huge story, but you have two choices, op-ed dude. Again, assuming it's a dude. Mm-hmm. Either you can put your name on it and not be a coward, or we can have you talk to our colleague
Treason.
Maggie Haberman, who can turn this into a proper news story with all the context that you have in the Woodward book. And one thing Woodward says is, look, I provide a lot of specific details that you can hang your hat on, many of which can actually be verified. There's nothing to verify that this guy isn't a troll. Nothing to verify that this guy isn't a minor undersecretary of deputy of something. You know, to some extent, if you are self-aggrandizing, then it looks cooler to be anonymous than to actually use your name. Yeah. And so I think kind of people who are higher up in the administration also have more to lose by doing this, and or they can influence Trump more directly by like actually just influencing him directly. And so I don't know. I mean, I think it's probably like someone that is not a household name.
So let's end on this.
And also there are a lot more, I'm sorry, there are also a lot more non-household names than household names. And so just kind of as a base rate proposition, we haven't heard, even us as our own type of journalists, we haven't heard of 90% of people who are senior administration officials, right? The general public hasn't heard of 98% or whatever else. And so the odds are that you're drawing from that much larger pool.
So let's end on that exact thing and then just get a quick answer here. But let's say that as we were recording this, the name of the person came out. Galen walks into this room. He says, the person's been unmasked. It is so-and-so. Do you think it would be someone whose name we would recognize? Nate?
No, I'd lay 2-1 against that.
Claire?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think it would be. I have a little more faith in the New York Times. Can I actually put a pin in this segment this way, though? One of, I think, the starkest conclusions from the Woodward book, and you could say the op-ed too, is sort of that Trump is in private who he is in public, right? Everything we have suggests that. And in public, he professes to believe he's innocent of this, the witch hunt and all that stuff, right? I actually think that could have a big effect on how this investigation unfolds. If you look back, I was reading actually the old Woodward and Bernstein book, The Final Days, which I think I've mentioned on this podcast before. Great book. It was their follow-up to All the President's Men. And they talk about, in that, it's the Nixon administration responding to Watergate, right? And there's this scene of Nixon listening to his tapes and going through them with his press secretary, Ron Ziegler, sort of like going through kind of quote by quote and being like, here's how I would interpret this, and making the best interpretation for them, right? Nixon and Ziegler and the administration. And in the end, they release I think it was like the notes and a memo to Senate investigators, right? Thinking they had sort of convinced themselves, oh, we're sort of innocent of all this, right? And so the more that I think Trump convinces himself he's innocent, or just generally has a misconception of the facts on the ground, even the facts he was personally involved in, the worse set up they are to defend themselves against this. So I think that was kind of one of the main things I took away from the book, is like Trump is really might be kind of his own worst enemy, in that if he convinces himself and those around him that all of this is a witch hunt, then he's not in a good position to defend himself.
This is what a good comment, Micah. This has nothing to do with it, though. We would be remiss if we didn't read a couple of the things. In case you haven't read the book, I found some of these anecdotes. I haven't read the book, but some of the anecdotes that the people at ABC pulled, I just feel like say some interesting things about the Trump psyche. These are the two most interesting to me. One, in an early meeting, Trump asked economic advisor Gary Cohn why the U.S. can't just print more money. Okay.
See, this kind of stuff.
Wait. And then two, this one I found interesting. Trump doesn't trust human intelligence gathering, saying, quote, I don't believe in human sources. These are people who have sold their souls and sold out their country, which I find like an interesting view on the intelligence community that kind of like spins into like his conspiratorial like deep state thing. Anyway, I there's some interesting like psychological stuff going on too, which is, when people beyond the people being worried about his state of mind.
I think that's the gossipy stuff. Like,
I don't know.
So-and-so called Trump an idiot.
Wait, but the gossipy stuff that has to do with like the way that people actually govern.
Yeah.
All right, let's leave it there, and we will see if this continues to go. And actually, this provides a good segue to our next segment, because a lot of this conversation was sort of about, is this going to have a big effect? How will this, on balance, affect Trump and his approval rating and so forth? And we are going to talk about his approval rating, which has moved significantly for the first time, basically since spring. So we'll discuss. But first, let me tell you that today's podcast is brought to you by Kronos. Look into any great business, whether it's a manufacturer or a hotel, a store, school, or hospital. Don't actually wander in and look. This is a sort of a metaphor. But if you look into each and every one of them, you'll find the same thing. Great people. Kronos believes that great businesses are powered by great people. And with Kronos Workforce Solutions, you will find them, keep them, and engage them. Here's an example. Kronos will make sure that your payroll, for instance, is done right the first time from punch to paycheck. How great would it be to have someone just handle payroll for you? HR, payroll, talent, and timekeeping in one unified system, all with a proven implementation approach. And this is really key, simplified, transparent pricing. Learn more at Kronos.com. That's right, Kronos.com. Check it out. Kronos, workforce innovation that works. All right, we're back. And at the time of this recording, President Trump's approval rating stands at
40.6%.
Very good, Micah Cohn. Last week, his approval dropped below 40% for the first time since February. So, Nate, for about half a year, Trump's approval has stayed pretty much stagnant in the low 40s. But now we have a bit of a drop-off, somewhat sudden. Anything going on?
What happened, Nate?
What happened? So then I come in and I'm like,
I mean, we're not talking about a huge move. We're talking about going from 42 to 39, now back up to 40 and a half. It's like the issue is that it happens to be at a threshold where, like, historically there have been presidents who kind of survived a 41, 42% approval rating, including Obama, Reagan, Clinton. like almost every two-term president at some point. If you get down in the 30s, then first of all, then you get to a point where, number one, the midterms go from being bad to worse for the GOP. The GOP starts to think about, like, maybe we would actually be better off if he's not on the ballot in 2020. If he's at 35% versus 42%.
20. 3 points is not a ton, but it's a meaningful 3 points.
But it's a meaningful amount, but it's also kind of like, but look, I think it's probably...
Why? Because it switches from the 30s to the 40s?
I think
because of where it appears in the calendar year?
I think all of that, actually. Yeah, you're coming just as sort of people are tuning in to the midterms, right? It happens to be at this level Nate mentioned where it's sort of in the historical record. I'm repeating what Nate said, but, presidents in the low 40s, you can kind of get by, maybe lose seats, but it's not a catastrophe. The 30s is sort of much worse. And then
the dirty 30s.
The dirty 30s. And then, it's like his approval hasn't moved that much. So I sort of want to ascribe more meaning to the fact that it has seemed to move. And there's like a readily available explanation for it, which is
what?
Mueller.
Which is the Mueller indictments, which is while Trump's approval rating has gone down, it sort of happened right after Michael Cohen pled guilty to some stuff, and Paul Manafort was found guilty of some stuff. And then we saw in polls views of Mueller improved and Trump's approval rating went down. It's sort of an easy Occam's razor story, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Probably. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it feels sustained a little bit, right? Where you had, and it kind of goes back to partly this Helsinki press conference, the indictments before that. So it's kind of been a period of 6 to 8 weeks now where, I guess 7 weeks, where like the focus is on Russia and other scandals. And there's actually like a lot of red meat, right? People are getting
a lot of meat.
Yeah,
Trump did not have a good summer.
Right.
Basically. And Trump is acting a bit more erratically. We did something kind of half-jokingly in the past that says the more the president tweets, the worse he is. I haven't checked that if that holds up, but he certainly is like not acting like he has these big wins or whatever, like he claimed after North Korea, for example. So for all that, it's still like, okay, you go from 42 to 39 or 40. It's like not really that much of a shift, but like...
No, we could be back at 42 in 3 weeks.
But like my whole theory is like, it's important though, right? Because a lot of these things have temporary effects. And so people are like, well, nothing matters. Well, it's like there's always a kind of drumbeat of a certain amount of craziness for Trump. And so maybe if he stopped acting like he acts in the Woodward book or something, right? I don't know how that happens.
That won't happen.
Yeah.
No, we've been saying that for a while.
But in the hypothetical where Trump was just play acting the whole time and he's actually like an extremely emotionally intelligent. The emotional IQ is off the charts, right? And he decides, well, now I'm up for re-election.
Treason.
I'm just going to act normally. And he's like, I don't know, right? He's eloquent, Donald Trump, yes. He has a slight British mid-Atlantic accent.
What if Donald Trump is secretly a British aristocrat?
Voltaire and reads...
The point is that, like, it's the constant drumbeat of stuff that keeps his approval rating low, right? And so it won't move because you have, like, you would ordinarily have it revert back to, like, the partisan mean, which is 48 with 4% unsure or something. You know what I mean?
And that's the answer to Claire. What Claire said originally about the Woodward book is like, well, will any of this have an effect? And I think the answer to that is like, it already has. The Woodward book itself may or may not sort of break through to the larger public, but the behavior depicted in the book has already been seen and judged by the American people. And it's why Trump's approval rating is sort of already depressed.
So
it has been found wanting, yeah.
So, Nate, very quickly, how does this connect so people can understand how these things are all tied together, from Trump's approval to the generic ballot, which has also gone down a percentage point or two, and then I guess in turn to our model and the Democrats' chances in the House?
Read this data code out.
Read the static? Okay.
No, I'm kidding.
No,
Gen is total equals 0. Replace is total equals 1 if component _ no equals I1. What's that?
All right, you got it, folks? Okay, there you go. That's your answer.
That's how this all factors in.
No, so look, first of all, generic ballots we wrote about last week can bounce up and down a lot, although we're now using a version that's much more of a long-term average. But voters are concerned about the president. It's kind of what the midterms, especially a first midterm, tends to be about. And so you'd expect those two things to move together. The fact that they have moved together tends to mean it's more likely there's a real move and not just a statistical quirk occurring. For our model, the generic ballot is the more important measure. Presidential approval is also used in kind of an indirect way. But the generic ballot's also at kind of an inflection point where, depending on which version of the model you look at, Democrats need to win the generic ballot by 5 or 6 or 7 points, or need to win the House popular vote by 5 or 6 or 7 points to be favored to actually win the House. That's the handicap the GOP has. We call it 5 to 7 points, right? So if the generic goes from, say, 7 points, it's like a range where it's like, the House is kind of still, it leans Democrat, but very much up for grabs. Assume it's a toss-up until proven otherwise. If you go to 9, though, all of a sudden it's like, actually at 9 points of popular vote margin, Democrats are favored to win like 40 seats, right? So we're on this precipice where you go from Democrats don't win the House at all to where they win 40 seats, and then probably at about that threshold they begin to have a chance at the Senate too. And so that's why these small changes are important. If they were at 2 and it went to 3, it wouldn't matter as much. If they were at 13 and it went to 14, it wouldn't matter as much. But we are right on the precipice between the GOP having a fighting chance and being favored in the Senate, so having better than a fighting chance in the Senate, to where things really go to hell.
So, and let's leave it on that note, and I just want to call out how important that is, that we're right at that margin where Democrats are starting to overcome some of their structural disadvantages. And I will shout out that we have a great video up on the site now that kind of explains some of that and the way that Democrats have to be in this 7 to 9 point range in order to start securing a victory. Popular vote victory translating to an actual victory in the House. So, good note to end it on, and that's it. We're going to end this show. Nate Silver, thank you, as always.
Thank you. And again, any feistiness this episode was caused by the lack of sleep and the LaCroix.
Now, back into the cave, Nate. Yeah. Finish that model.
Lack of sleep, lack of LaCroix, and Nate's just sort of basic temperament and disposition. Claire Malone.
Which I like.
Pre-podcast, people used to think I was a nice guy.
I tolerate.
Which you manage.
No, I don't.
Yeah. Well, it's in your job title. Claire Malone, thanks to you.
Thanks, Jody.
Micah Cohen, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
My name is Jody Avigan. Galen Druk is our producer. Model Talk coming this week, so if you have any questions for Galen and Nate, send them our way. Tony Chow is also in the control room. Hit us up with any questions you have, podcasts at 538.com. You can also, of course, tweet at us with any questions or comments about the show. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.